Today is the 5th and final week of our contract training. We've spent 4 weeks up until today going through the purchase contract. And today will be the last week of this purchase contract training, and we're going to go over some of the most common addenda that are used in the purchase contract. They're added to it. The purpose of addenda are that there are things that are not in every purchase contract, and so you leave them out. The addenda are what address specific items that are unique to each one. By the way, the plural of addendum is addenda. It is not addendums. If you say addendums, you sound dumbs. Okay, it's addenda. So we're going to go through some of the most common addenda and just kind of read through it. We do not have the time to read through every single paragraph and word on every single addenda, because that will be another 5 weeks. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over some of the most common ones and just highlight some of the things that you should be aware of and be prepared to explain should your client or ask questions. Okay? Again, this is a question-based training. We are recording, so keep your swearing to a minimum. And if you do ask questions, ask them loud and proud, because we want to pick it up on the video. Okay? Everybody's got a packet of the addenda we'll go through today. Okay, so okay. So the first one is the as-is addendum. It's a scary addendum if you don't know what it means, and it's a scary addendum for buyers because they don't understand what they mean. So what I want to do is at least first start with paragraph 1. Who wants to read this out loud? Eric, you got a good booming voice.
Purchase of this as-is condition addendum. Buyer understands and agrees that this addendum is a material factor in the seller's acceptance of the purchase price for the property, and that seller would not have been willing to sell the property to buyer unless buyer accepted the terms of this addendum. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that this addendum played a material part of the seller's reason for accepting the buyer's contract. Okay? So the buyer needs to know that. What this does not mean is, it does not mean the buyer does not get to do an inspection. It does not mean that. You have to know that. You have to explain that to your buyer. This does not address anything about inspections. The buyer is still fully expected to do their own due diligence, which includes the home inspection. This as-is addendum doesn't say you don't get to do one. Be very clear on that, because buyers' first inclination is that if they sign an as-is addendum, they're not going to be able to do an inspection. That is not true. What it's saying is, it's really a statement saying the buyer's not going to nickel and dime the seller. Right? A buyer is not going to ask for different things like, we're not going to ask for a cracked electrical socket plate to be replaced. We're not going to have you tighten every single doorknob and hand pull on the cabinets. That's what it's saying. We're not going to ask for these things. The as-is addendum simply states that we're buying the property as is. However, also be aware that when you're talking to your buyers about this addendum, that they are very clear and comfortable knowing that when we do the inspection, if something shows up in the inspection that we did not know about, for instance, the home inspector comes out of the attic and says, the ceilings or the roof is going to cave in, I'm getting out of the house. Okay? That is now a material fact that the buyer was not aware of prior to making the offer. That becomes a negotiable part of it.
okay? You can always renegotiate things during the contract, okay? A buyer, just be aware that the seller is not obligated to fix anything. The buyer, however, is not obligated to buy anything, okay? At least not until the inspection periods have passed. During the inspection period, the buyer's not obligated to buy anything. They can ask for anything. It's not advisable for them to be asking for little things. But if there's something substantial material, absolutely, we go back to the table and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, there's some serious things going on with this house that we did not know about, you did not disclose. Let's talk about it, okay? The as-is addendum is just saying, we're gonna buy the house as is. It does not say you don't get to do an inspection. Does anybody understand that? Number 3 simply says that the seller remains obligated to disclose material facts. So the as-is addendum isn't saying you have to buy this house and we're not making disclosure. It's not what that's saying either. It's saying that this house is for sale. Seller still has to disclose whatever material facts they know. Okay? Any questions on this as-is addendum? I think that's all you need to know about it. So we're not going to read through every single paragraph. Although you should be aware of what every single addendum means. You should read through this. The next addendum is the lead-based paint addendum. It's a disclosure. It's called the disclosure of information on lead-based paint and/or lead-based paint hazards. When is this disclosure required by federal law? I don't think the video picked you up.
Oh, homes built before 1978.
Okay, good. Homes built before 1978. It was 78 that the EPA had implemented laws that removed lead from lead-based paint. So this is a federal requirement, by the way. It's not a local state requirement, it's a federal requirement. Homes built before 1978 must have this lead-based paint disclosure. You'll also notice that this is the only form that doesn't look like the rest. It's the only one that doesn't have the HAR logo on it. Does anybody know why? The form is done by the feds. This is a federal form, and it has to have a certain format and certain verbiage. So this form is the only one that is not put out by the Hawaii Association of Realtors. It's put out by the federal government. Okay? These are things you need to know. And what it's saying is there's a seller's disclosure that the seller will select either there is a presence of lead-based paint or the seller has no knowledge of it. In most cases, it's going to be the seller has no knowledge of any lead-based paint. And that's enough for disclosure requirements for the federal government. If the seller has selected that there is no lead-based paint, then the seller needs to provide anything that they have, any kind of reports that they did testing or anything else. Okay? So this section here will say either seller knows or doesn't know, and seller has provided or seller has no reports of any lead-based paint. Okay? The second part is where the buyer signs. The buyer's acknowledging, saying that 1, they've received any information of copies above, or 2, that they've received a pamphlet to protect your family. There is a pamphlet called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. It's a pamphlet that needs to be handed out to every buyer of property before 1978. Where do you get that pamphlet?
Online.
Yeah, there's many ways to get it. Online, you can just search Protect Your Family from Lead-Based Paint or Protecting Your Family from Lead in Your Home, and there'll be tons of sites that have it. We also have it here. Okay, so it's a requirement that you give this pamphlet to the buyer. Now, giving it means you don't need to print it out, you can email them the pamphlet, because it's pretty thick pamphlet, email it to them, okay? But you need to be aware of that. And then it's a purchaser has, you're gonna check one or the other. Receive the 10-day opportunity to conduct any lead-based paint assessments, or 2, waive the opportunity. You don't ever want them to waive their opportunity, you want them to have received the 10-day opportunity. Okay? Then the agents need to acknowledge. Agent has informed the seller, this is where the listing agent informs the seller of their duty to disclose. And everybody here needs to sign this form. Okay? Both agents, the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, the buyers and the sellers, everybody needs to sign the form. Be aware that what's very common in writing contracts and making offers is that an offer is completed with the lead paint addendum. And the purchaser signs this and dates it before the seller has signed and dated it. That date being signed and dated before the seller's signature and date is a violation of federal law. And 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 of you now know what most agents don't know. The purchaser's signature and date before the seller's signature and date is a violation of federal law. And feds do audit contracts. They'll come in and they'll go into an office and look at all the contracts, and one of the main things they're looking for is that right there. So be aware of it. If your buyer is signing it, it has to be signed after the seller signs it. Any questions? I'm just going in order of what this thing printed out. So the next one in the order of the packet that you received is the cooperating brokerage firm's separate contract. This is, we refer to it as the co-op. It's a cooperating broker, so it's the listing agent agreeing to share the commission with the buyer's agent. If you're the buyer's agent, this is the most important form in the contract, in the offer. This is your ability to get paid. Okay? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna fill in the seller's name, buyer's name, property address, and then in here, number 1, the listing brokerage firm agrees to pay, and you're gonna put whatever is being offered in the MLS. A good practice is when you see an MLS listing that you're gonna show your client, and especially if you're gonna make an offer on it, is to print a hard copy of it. There are several reasons for that. One is so you have a record of what was in the MLS and what was being included in the sale, such as appliances. But more so, what was the commission that is being shared? Because if they change it at a certain point down the road, there may be some kind of argument of what they were offering as compensation. So if you see one, I mean, when you show a property, you should print it and keep a hard copy of the MLS. So this is going to be filled in with whatever is the, whatever they're offering. I believe that our templates are pre-filled to say 3% of sales price plus GET. So just be aware of that. If they're not offering GET, and in most cases they're not, remove that. If they're offering only 2.5%, make sure you make that change, okay? And then the brokers have to sign it at the bottom. Okay? It's not the agents that sign it, it's the brokers. So when you get your contract reviewed, then that's the time that whoever's reviewing your contract will also sign the cooperating brokers agreement. Next is gonna be the FHA addendum. Okay, any contract for sale or purchase contract and offer to purchase that has FHA financing is required to have the FHA finance or FHA addendum attached to it. Who's got a loud voice? Christensen. You want to read this first part right here. It is expressly agreed.
It is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of the purchase contract, buyers shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property described herein, or to incur any penalty by forfeiture of earnest money deposits, or otherwise unless buyer has been given in accordance with HUD, FHA, or VA requirements, a written statement by the Federal Housing Commissioner, Veterans Administration, or a director endorsement letter setting forth the appraised value of the property of not less than the given amount. The buyer shall have the privilege and option of proceeding with the consummation of the contract without regard to the amount of the appraised valuation. The appraised valuation is arrived at to determine the maximum mortgage of the Department of Housing and Urban Development will ensure. HUD does not warrant the value nor the condition of the property. The buyer should satisfy himself or herself that the price and the condition of the property are acceptable.
Okay, good. What does that mean? On the VA addendum, which we'll go into next, it's known as the escape clause. Okay? In fact, it's funny, the VA actually calls it the escape clause. What this simply says is that if the property does not appraise for the offer price that was made, the buyer, at their choice, can cancel the contract. Okay? They can elect to continue, but they do not have to. They're not obligated to continue if the property doesn't appraise. Every FHA financing offer must have this addendum on it. So also be aware, as a listing agent, that's one of the reasons why FHA offers are a little weaker, because they have that escape clause built into it. Okay.
Have a question for Kristen. Do they have to?
Then there's also a real estate certification here that says this is the contract, the offer is the complete offer. There's no any side offers
This is Maria.
that are unknown. This is the real estate certification saying this is the complete contract. Okay? Any questions? The next one is the residential leasehold property addendum. Anytime there is leasehold property, when you're selling a leasehold property, the leasehold property addendum must be attached to it. The leasehold property addendum says that under state law, the seller of any leasehold property
Oh, by the way, that we saw.
is required to furnish a leasehold disclosure report. Okay, there are companies, professional companies that prepare a leasehold disclosure report. It is required by law. And some of the things that are going to be on the leasehold disclosure are these. One is, it's going to say who the lessor is. Who's the lessor?
The person that's buying
The lessor is the fee owner. Right? The person who owns the land. It's not the seller. The seller is selling leasehold property. The lessee is the buyer. The lessor is the person who owns the fee. It is not the seller. And then some of the things in the report are required. Is going to be the lease rent. The lease rent will stipulate what is the lease rent and how long is it good for, right? What are the graduated payments? All that is spelled out under the lease rent in the report. It will also spell out what are the renegotiation dates. What is the renegotiation date? Right, it's when the fixed period of the lease rents end, and now the lessee and the lessor will renegotiate what the remaining period of the lease will be for lease rents. And so it's going to say when the fixed period ends and the renegotiation date is. And then there's an expiration date. The expiration date is to say, when does this lease expire? These are all important dates that every purchaser of leasehold property needs to know. And then, very important, it will state what the surrender clause is. All leases have a surrender clause. And they basically say that at the termination, at the end, the expiration of the lease, that the land reverts back to the lessor, including everything on it, the improvements and all, go back to the lessor with no compensation. So on the second page of the leasehold disclosure, under number 5, delivery of disclosure, normally you're going to check A. Buyer will receive a disclosure later. And with all leasehold property, the buyer has a 10-day right of rescission after they've received the leasehold disclosure statement. And then number 6, Eric, this is the part where it says the seller of the property is the lessee. Okay, so that's the leasehold disclosure statement. It is required for every property that you sell that is leasehold. Okay, any questions? You guys are so quiet. It's going to be a short class. Okay, next one is the short sale addendum. Short sale addendum is attached to any property that is being sold as a short sale. The main part of the short sale addendum that you need to know is number 1, time frames. Okay, time frames. Maria, you want to read that?
Sure. Buyer and seller agree that the time frames in the paragraphs checked below that are measured from the acceptance date in the purchase contract will begin upon seller's written notification to buyer that approvals by all lien holders have been received and approved by seller. Can we read all those?
No, it's fine. Okay. So what this is saying is the normal purchase contract has contingencies and time frames on when certain things need to be performed. Right? These are the most common ones that are all in this area here. They have to do their inspections, they have to get financing, they have to do, elect different things like tenancy investing and show proof of cash and all that stuff.
What this says is, in a short sale is not binding on either party until the lender approves it. Okay? In fact, number 6 down below here
Yeah.
says that right here. Christensen, can you read number 6?
Buyer's rights. Buyer may search for another property and elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 0-2 at any time prior to seller's written notification to buyer or of approval of the short sale by all people.
Okay, so right there, number 6 says that the buyer, this contract is not binding on anybody until written approval has been, the written approval of the sale from the lender has been delivered to the buyer. So going back up to here, these time frames, you wanna check all of them, because this is saying that none of these time frames begin until lender approval has been given. Right? You do not want your buyer to be doing a home inspection and spending $500 for the home inspection on a property that the sale has not been approved by the lender yet. Neither do you want money spent on anything, termite reports, surveys. You don't want money spent on anything until the lender approves the sale, because there's a good chance that the lender will not approve the sale, in which case then your buyer has wasted all that money doing certain things. So this is the one that you need to know of, that you're gonna check everything. Nothing starts until the seller or the lender's approval gets delivered. That's when the J1 inspection period will begin. Yes.
But if it happens to be cash and they actually have it, to make it strong, we probably would want to check that, at least if they can show it already.
Yes, you're not, in fact, the lender is going to require proof of funds when they're reviewing the contract, the offer to approve it. The lender's gonna want that. Lender's gonna want the pre-approval letter. So some of these things you are gonna, proof of funds doesn't cost the buyer anything. What you want to defer to until the lender gives approval of the sale, is anything that's gonna cost the buyer money, right? Showing proof of funds doesn't cost the buyer money, so it's okay to do that up front. And in any case, the buyer's or the lender's gonna require that anyway. But anything that costs money on the buyer's part, you're gonna defer.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, you need to explain to your client that the short sale, you don't plan your life around it, because there's a good chance that the short sale will not be approved. And because number 6 says that it is not binding until lender approval comes in, you're gonna make the offer and then you're gonna move on with your life. You're not gonna plan your life around this purchase. We're gonna keep looking for property, and in the case that we find something that's better than the short sale, we're gonna cancel this. Because it can take months to get a short sale approved. A short sale is not called a short sale because it's fast. It's called a short sale because there's not enough funds in the sale proceeds to pay off the loan. So a short sale is anything but short. So in the meantime, the buyer keeps looking for property. And if and when you find another property, you decide at that point, we want to continue with the short sale or go and pursue another one. Okay? Good question. Anybody else? The last one that we're going to cover is the VA Financing Addendum. Donna, you want to read number 1, the escape clause?
Escape clause. It is expressly agreed that, notwithstanding any other provisions of the purchase contract, buyer shall not incur any penalty by forfeiture of earnest money or otherwise or be obligated to complete the purchase of the property described herein, if the purchase price or costs exceeds the reasonable value of the property established by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Buyer shall, however, have the privilege and option of proceeding with the consummation of this contract without regard to the amount of the reasonable value established by the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Good. So what does that mean? It's just like the FHA addendum where it says, if the property does not appraise, the purchaser, the buyer, is not obligated to purchase the property. They still may want to, but it's by their choice and without penalty should they cancel.
So appraised for purchase price, not loan amount. It's got approach price.
It has to be, if the appraisal comes out lower than the offer price, or the contract price, or the purchase price, all synonymous, then the purchaser, the buyer, is not obligated to buy it. But it is upon their sole discretion on whether or not they want to proceed. They may say, well, we've got the cash, we want the house anyway, but they're gonna have to come up with the difference. So anytime the appraisal in an FHA or VA offer does not appraise, the buyer has the right to cancel without penalty.
What's the time limit for that?
Time limit for,
For the buyer to use this escape clause?
Right.
You can say the appraisal is less than a purchase price. How many days do they have to give notice that they're gonna use this?
it doesn't specify,
Yeah,
it's a
not
good
stated here,
question.
yeah.
It doesn't specify the time frame, but normally you're gonna decide right away. You can't drag it out for,
Yeah, so
for
but-
2 or 3 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
To say, well, let me think about it, and 2 weeks later say, no, we're gonna
Yeah,
cancel.
so
Now,
seller,
you have to decide right
seller wants
away.
to have a certain number of days.
Yeah, no, you have to decide right away.
Oh.
Number 3, termite inspections. Just be aware that although it's customary that the seller pays for the termite inspections in a VA purchase, the buyer is not allowed to pay for it. So sometimes, when you're competing against other offers, you wanna make your contract more attractive to the seller. Some small things can make a difference, like offering to pay for the termite inspection. In a VA purchase, they are not allowed to. In fact, it's called a non-allowable. So the next one is number 4. Who wants to read this? Jay, you got a great reading voice. Would you read number 4?
Discount points, VA funding fee, and other fees. Under VA loan guidelines, buyer may not pay for the VA non-allowables: escrow, notary, mortgage, assignment of mortgage, leasehold, or deed documentation, title endorsement, photos or inspections, attorneys, homeowners association maintenance transfers, tax services, underwriting, processing, recording, fund wires, couriers? Yep. And tracking fees as applicable, along with any other fees not allowed to be charged to the buyer unless the veteran is not charged a loan origination fee by his lender, which may not exceed 1% of the loan amount. Only then can the veteran pay the VA non-allowables, but only up to 1% of the loan amount.
Okay, so these are called non-allowables. These are things that the buyer is not allowed to pay for a VA loan. It's also pretty much the same list for FHA as well. They're called non-allowables, which is why an FHA or VA loan is less attractive. I'm not saying that it's not acceptable to a seller, it's less attractive to a seller because they're gonna have to pick up some of the costs that the VA and or the FHA don't allow the buyer to pay. And these are costs that they're saying anybody can pay it except the buyer. Where in normal cases, like in a conventional purchase, the buyer would normally pay these, the VA and the FHA don't allow that.
You know, it says that the lenders can, do they usually do, I mean, they sometimes accept, unless the veteran is not charged a loan origination fee. So is that the case where the lender says they'll pay that stuff?
Yeah, good question. So what normally they'll do, lenders will do, is they'll waive those non-allowables. Which makes you wonder why they charge them in the first place.
Meaning they pay it? Does that mean?
They just waive them.
They waive them.
Yeah.
Oh, so they don't get charged?
Yeah.
Oh, they don't charge them. Oh, they're the ones who charge them anyway.
Yeah.
Oh.
So in other words, they're allowed to charge 1%, period. So they'll usually charge it as a discount fee, but not as they can't charge them. If they're gonna waive the discount fee, then they can charge them, the VA, the veteran is allowed to pay the non-allowables. But not to exceed 1%. In practice, in most cases, lenders will just waive those fees. Okay, good question. Any other questions? So those are the most common addenda that we use in real estate. There are lots of other addenda. There's oceanfront addenda, there are there's plain language addenda. There's a lot more that are not as common as the ones we just went through. In fact, there's so many, every single thing in a purchase and sale of real estate is negotiable. Everything. So much so that the HAR has what is called a blank addendum, where it's just blank. You can fill out anything you want. So just be aware that there's a lot of different things that are covered in the real estate transaction. And what I just wanted to do was highlight what some of the most common ones are. Any questions on these addenda? Because what we're going to do next is we're going to go into now that we've gone through every paragraph of the contract and understand some of the addenda that are involved in it, we're now going to talk or go into how you use a contract to sell and close the client to make an offer. Because what's very common is that you're going to show property, and the buyer very commonly is going to say, well, we want to think about it. In fact, it's a pretty valid objection, isn't it? We want to think about it. We want to go home and talk about it. We want to sleep on it, right? So how do you use a contract to get a buyer to say, you're right, let's make the offer now? Okay, so it's using the contract to sell. Let's start by saying the right way to work with buyers is to, if you can get them to, if you can remove the risk and fear of them making an offer, then it would make sense for them to make an offer right away. Okay, so when a buyer says, we love the house, we want to think about it, what do you think would be the best way to do it? Especially in a market where properties are selling fast, there's a lot of buyers, little inventory. Would the best way be to let them go home, think about it, and then a couple days later call you and say, Eric, this is a great property, we want to make the offer. And then you pull it up on the MLS, you contact the leasing agent, they've already accepted an offer and put it into escrow. The buyer now has lost out on that home. Or make an offer, get the buyer or get the seller to accept the offer, and now you're in the driver's seat and take all the time that you want to decide whether or not you want it, right? In fact, if a buyer's
offer gets accepted, have they bought a house? No. There are tons of contingencies in it before the sale takes place, right? So would it make sense that really when a buyer makes an offer and a seller accepts it, the reality is all they're doing is getting the seller to take the property off the market. That's all they're doing, right? Now the buyer is in the driver's seat. The buyer gets to decide what happens to the house, at least within the time frames they're given in the contract. Does that make sense? So if I can say, look, all we want to do is tie up the property, get you into contract, put you in the driver's seat, and then decide. The whole time you can decide whether or not you want to buy it. That's the better way. You remove all risk. So let's go through just a few of the contingencies in a contract that allows the buyer to say, I can still get out of this contract if I don't want to buy it. Okay, now, keep in mind, you want to treat all parties fairly. Even though you represent the buyer, you're not trying to take advantage of anybody. But you do want to put your buyer into an advantageous position of being in control of what happens with his property. Okay? If the buyer decides they're not going to buy it, then you want to be fair to the seller and say, okay, we're going to release you from this contract, knowing that the buyer's going to cancel. But until then, the buyer has the ability to think about it, do their due diligence. So let's go through some of these contingencies. On the purchase contract, I'm going to scroll down through here, and I'm going to come to, first of all, here. Section D, offer to buy and the purchase price. So we're going to put down the purchase price, and under here, in most cases, you're going to have a financing contingency. The financing contingency comes in a little later. I'm going to scroll down to Section G, page 4. G1 says that a title report has to be given to the buyer. And G2 says that, G2A says that if the buyer is not satisfied with the preliminary title report, buyer may within so many days terminate this purchase contract. So that's contingency. That's the first contingency that says, look, if the title isn't clear, the buyer does not have to purchase the property. So that's number one. Okay? So we're going to mark how many contingencies there are for a buyer to say, I can get out of this contract without penalty. H3, financing contingency. The buyer's obligation to purchase is contingent upon buyer obtaining the loan described in D2, which was the second page. So it says that if the buyer cannot get financing, the buyer's not obligated to purchase. So there's your second way for a buyer to say, I don't have to buy this property. I-1, seller's obligation to disclose and the disclosure statement. And I-1 says that seller's obligation to disclose that they have to furnish a seller's disclosure statement. On top of that, I-2 says that even if they find out later discovered information, that they have to update their seller's disclosure statement. And I-4 says that upon receipt of the seller's disclosure statement, the buyer has so many days to review the disclosure statement and decide whether or not they're going to accept that. There's contingency 3, that a buyer can cancel the contract. And actually, a fourth way, if there's later discovered information the buyer has an additional time frame in which to decide whether or not they want to proceed. J1 is the big one. Page 7. Jay, can you read J1?
General inspection of property contingency. At buyer's sole cost and expense, buyer shall have the right to, personally or by any expert, professional, or other representatives of buyer's choice, A, inspect the property of any portion thereof. B, inspect all major appliances and fixtures, plumbing, electrical, and gas, included in the sale. C, inspect all public records related to the property and its use. And D, review all matters described in paragraph I-8. Seller shall provide buyer and buyer's representatives access to the property for inspections during reasonable hours with reasonable prior notice to seller. The obligation of buyer to purchase the property is contingent upon the buyer's approval of inspections and review of all matters described in paragraph I-8 within 10 or otherwise days after the acceptance date. All inspections and reviews must be completed within this time period. Seller agrees that the property inspection requires that the utilities be turned on, including propane, if applicable, at seller's expense. If buyer disapproves of inspection or review results within the specified time period, buyer may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant of paragraph 02.
Okay, so J1's an important one because it's the big one. It's the get out of jail free, number 5, right? J1 says that the buyer is allowed to do their inspections, right? And if in fact it says right here, personally or by any expert. So do they have to hire someone to do it? No. Are they advised to? Absolutely. But in the meantime, when I want to think about it, if the buyer says we want to think about it, great, let's make an offer, tie it up, and you can think about it during this period. There's no question, this is the get out of jail free card. You get out of, you can cancel this contract within that time frame. That's the big one. So for the first, whatever you put in here, 10 days is customary, 7 days makes it more attractive, 1 day makes it really attractive. They can cancel the contract. So that's contingency number 5 that they can get out. That's the big one. J1, you cancel within that time frame, really no questions asked.
What public records are you talking about in section C?
Good question. Public records would be things like building department permits, CC&Rs, any deed restrictions on them, any easements, anything that's recorded against the title. That's what we refer to as the public records.
So is the agent gonna help the buyer get that information?
Yes.
So the agent has to check all the public records for the buyer?
No, the agent's not just, don't take on that liability. It's
Yeah, I
not
know,
saying
so
who's going to do it, it's just saying that you have the ability to do it.
Yes, I'm thinking the buyer is not gonna know what public records to check.
Yes, but it's just saying that they have the right to do that. Whether or not they do,
Yeah, if
and
I'm a
who
buyer.
helps them with it is not the question here. The question is, or the contingency says they have a right to.
Yes,
And
but
so
that-
the deed will have, the title report will have information. If it's a single family home and you're concerned about permits that, or things that were done to the home that may or may not have been permitted, you would request in the offer that the buyer has to give a permit package as well. But this paragraph is just saying that the buyer has the right to inspect these things. Number, page 8K, safety and survey. If it's a single family home, then surveying has to be done, right? So there's contingency number 6. It says that boundary encroachments have to be cured. And it says here, buyer may elect to terminate buyer may accept the encroachments or elect to terminate the purchase contract if there are encroachments on there. Okay? So that's number 6. That's the 6th way that a buyer still has contingencies on saying whether or not they want to proceed. L, section L, the termite provision. Termite provision says that a termite inspection has to be performed, right? Is that a way for them to get out of it? The termite report in and of itself does not. In fact, it says here that they don't have a right to cancel the agreement against the termite inspection. However, it says here that the seller, if there's termite damage or infestation that is discovered that the seller did not know about and did not previously disclose in the seller's disclosure statement, they must update that seller's disclosure statement. Remember when I said later discovered information in the seller's disclosure? That's one example of later discovered information. So a seller delivers a seller's disclosure report, and it doesn't have anything about termite damage because they didn't know about it. And the termite inspection turns out that there is infestation and or damage. The seller's obligated now to update the seller's disclosure statement. And now that paragraph of the seller's disclosure statement would kick in, and the buyer has a right to cancel for later discovered information on the seller's disclosure statement. Number 8, condo docs. Right, it's a condominium, the buyer has the right, the seller must deliver all the condo docs to the buyer, and the buyer will have X amount of days to review them. And if the buyer does not approve of the condominium documents, they can cancel. What are some of the things that they would be looking for? Well, financials. You want to know that the building, the association they're buying into is solvent, that they're not having to levy an assessment against the owners. You want to know what kind of problems there are, what kind of delinquencies, how many delinquent owners there are in the building. All those things would be in the condo docs. So that's number 8 that allows the buyer to say, I don't want to buy this off or the property. And then, if there are special terms, you can write in special terms, right? And add to it. But right off the bat, just skimming through a contract, there are 8 ways for a buyer to say, I'm not obligated to purchase this property. So now knowing these 8 ways, at least 8, there are 60-something contingencies in the contract that have to be fulfilled. So how do you remove the risk and fear of a buyer by saying, look, let's go ahead, make the offer, tie up the property, and then think about it. You want to think about it? That's great. I think that's a great idea. Let's think about it. So let's do it this way. Does it make sense that we tie up the property, put you in the driver's seat, and allow you to think about it, rather than thinking about it and then deciding and realizing this is the perfect home, and then making an offer only to find out that it's already been sold or put under contract by someone else? Which one is the better way to do it? So this is what we say this is what we call removing risk and fear. If I remove all of the risk of a buyer just making an offer, there's really no risk. In fact, it doesn't make sense to wait to make an offer, does it? So this is how you get a buyer to go forward, to move forwards, especially ones that are kind of, I'm not sure, and you've been showing them all kinds of homes. By the way, if a buyer really loves a home, chances are there are other people that really love that home. And more than likely, you're going to be competing. There is no time to wait in this market. These are things that you have to be able to tell your buyer on why they need to make offers. There is no risk. We just went through easily 8 different ways, legitimate ways, for a buyer to say, I'm not going to proceed. Any questions?
How does this like, tactic like, how is it like amongst like between real estate agents? Like, if you bring a client and they don't go through with the deal, like how you proceed like as an agent?
That's a good question. So I am not encouraging that you treat sellers unfairly. And that's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying if you know that a buyer this isn't right for them and you're just trying to tie up properties and inconvenience sellers, that's not what I'm trying to teach. I'm trying to teach that you want to put your buyer in the most advantageous position. You represent the buyer. But you also want to be fair to the seller. So if 2 days later they decide, no, this isn't the right house for us, you should cancel right away. Don't drag the seller out. If you know that they're not going to proceed for whatever reason, you cancel it as soon as possible. You want to be fair to all parties. You also don't want to become known as the agent that cancels everything, because it's a small town, word travels very quickly. That's the agent that never closes deals. And so you don't want to be in that position either. If you do represent your buyer, you do want to put them in every position, make it as advantageous for them as possible to get the property. Does that help?
I mean, it does. I mean, but it's just, I understood that, but I still just don't. I don't want to I have to feel confident that my client, genuinely likes this property for me to do that, not just, for the sake, like you said, for the sake of tying up the property, but.
Exactly.
I guess I just have to have that feeling, that they genuinely like this property, for me to do it that way.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You're not going to be where you show them 5 houses and you make offers on all 5. You just tie them all up, just to tie them up. That's not what I'm trying to teach here. What I'm trying to teach is that you show property to a buyer, and you've shown them quite a few properties, and they walk in, and they're very particular, and they walk into a house, and you'll know the buying signals, right? Oh, I love this house. Oh, this is beautiful. This is the one we've been looking for. This has everything that we require. This is perfect. We love the neighborhood. We love the schools. We love this and that and the other thing. The kitchen is brand new. It's clean. We can just move in. Great. Let's make an offer. Well, we want to think about it. Okay? And so it's also how you ask them too, right? What's there to think about? Could come across as a little bit confrontational. What's there to think about? We've already determined that this is the best house. What's there to think about? Could be confrontational. Versus, you think it sounds a little different saying, what's there to think about? Versus, I agree. We should take a lot of time to think about it. But let's make the offer. There's 8 ways for you to decide whether or not, when we've got it under contract, right? But really, this is a great house. Let's make the offer and then take a lot of time to think about it. I agree, you should think about it. But it also makes sense to get it under contract and give you that time versus thinking about it and then deciding this is the right house and it's already under contract with someone else. Doesn't that make sense? But yeah, I'm not trying to teach, saying tie up the whole MLS because you can cancel every one of them. Don't do that. That's not what this section is for. It's to say, when as you get out and about and you start to show properties, you'll start to pick up on the buying signals. You'll know when a client likes the house and when they don't. A client, doesn't like the house when they don't even get out of the car. Now we don't need to see that one. Or they walk in the front door, and they take a few steps, and they're in it, and 30 seconds later, they're ready to leave. Those are clear signals that they don't like the house. The clear signals that they do, they're spending half an hour in it. They're opening every cabinet. They're saying things like very positive, affirming things about the house. They're already picturing themselves moving in. Oh, our hope chest can go here. The dining thing can go here. Our dining table fits perfectly here. You start to pick up on those kind of things. It is also your duty that if it's not the right house, to prevent them from making mistakes. That is also your duty. Right? But if it's a right house for them, it fits what they want, they can afford it, and they're saying we love it in whatever terms they're saying it in, then really it is part of your job to get them into that house. All right. Does that answer your question? Okay. Good. Good question. Any others? Okay, so that's it, guys. 5 weeks of the purchase contract. Next week we'll start into new subjects, but we're hoping that this part of it gets you to understand the contract. If you haven't been in the first 4 sessions, you should actually read through the contract and know it. Even if you were in the 4 sessions, you should read through it again and again, because the better you know these contracts, the better agent you will be. Okay? Thanks.
2 things about contracts.
2 things about contracts.
One is, if you're using support to write up a contract, make sure you do it in the time frame that they're here, just because they need a 5. So if you need a contract written up prior to submitting it to the agent that you're making it to, and it's after 5, you guys don't have to write it yourself, just because support's not going to be able to help. Also, another thing is, if you do have support write the offer, make sure you submit it, because there are a lot of agents who use support to its fullest and say, hey, can you submit the offer for me? I'll tell you right now, that doesn't help your cause. It's always best to submit it yourself, talk to the agent, and make them like you, because you have a better chance of actually getting it accepted. So we get that support is there to help you, but do understand that you need to help yourself in order to get that offer accepted. And by having support just submit it, that doesn't help your cause. So you always want to talk to the listing agent and try and make friends with them. Bottom line is you're working for your buyer and you want that offer to get accepted.
That's a really good point that Carlton brings up, that part of your job is to sell the contract to the listing agent. It's not a matter of just emailing it and be done with it. Do your job, be professional. Part of your job is, if you're representing the buyer, you're trying to get it for as little as possible for the buyer, right? That's your client, that's your job. However, you also have to sell it to the listing agent on why this offer is less but better than your other options. That's all in sales, part of selling the contract. Don't leave it up to support to just email it to them. Like Carlton said, exactly, you got the best chance of selling it yourself. That's not support's job, that's your job. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Another thing too is, I'm actually starting to do it more and more now when I submit offers. It's been kind of working, but not 100%, and I don't expect it to work 100%. But that's to actually write a cover letter and let people know about your clients. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't, but but I'd rather do it and it work than to not do it and not get your offer accepted. I just did one for a client, wrote the letter, super nice letter. In fact, I made them write it for me because I'm not a very good writer. But I read it good, wow, it's a really good letter. Our offer was third in regards to price. And they were actually considering accepting it according to the listing, just based on that letter. So I mean, we didn't get it, but they actually contemplated on accepting it. So if I had a chance, good for us, right? That's just that much more leverage we have in getting the property. So I believe we're like 5,000 off. So they chose 5,000 over the letter, but the listing agent said it was really close. They were very close in accepting our offer just because of the letter. So again, a letter doesn't take very long to write, but if you can get that offer accepted, good for you. You've done your job.
Good point.
Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, thanks guys.